Oh, man. Heartland, how are we today? We're good, aren't we? Oh, there's like 6 of you that are good. 7 of you good? 8 of you good? Hey, did anybody know that last song? You like brought back to the campfire of your like childhood, maybe? That was such a special song. We've sung it in churches for decades, and it's such a sweet spirit song, a story song, a song that says, God, everything about who I am has been held by you. It's a story song. It's a song of saying, God, this is my story. In this season of our church's growth and life, story has taken a real significant place among our community. We haven't told a ton of stories, but we want to. And today I'm really grateful for my friends, your friends. They usually sit right there, although someone's sitting in their seats. And whoever it is, it's your turn next week to tell your story. But Diane and Mark Chrislip are going to come to the stage and share their story about what it's been to follow God year after year through the ups and downs of life. Can you give it up for Heartlanders, Diane and Mark Chrislip? Come on, guys. No, come on. Like, this is courageous types of stuff. Come on. Yeah, this is good. This is good. Thank you, guys.
Morning. That was a great welcome. Thank you.
When we became believers back in the late 70s, a man who was mentoring us gave us 2 instructions: read the Bible and give generously to God's work. That seemed easy at the time. We were happily living in a tiny attic apartment with a tiny car on a tiny income, but we had everything that we needed, even though we were technically living in poverty, according to statistics in the newspaper. I mean, who knew? At that point, we had no idea how many ups and downs would be coming in the recent years. As you know, life has a way of throwing you curves. The first big curve that we encountered was when our 3rd child was born with a serious defect that required major surgery immediately and many hospitalizations over the next 6 months. Bills ate up our savings, and the stress of caring for him and 2 other children threatened to weigh us down and steal our faith.
It certainly was a tough time, but Jesus was really present during the whole time. We were never alone, and he was doing big things behind the scenes that we didn't know would be possible. The baby lived, glad to say, and he's healthy today. But during that time, we learned how to sacrifice. We learned how to sacrifice to be able to pay off those medical bills. And we continued to trust Jesus with our tithes and with our offerings to other ministries. And then he continued to meet our needs. Then, a few years later, I found out that my job as a regional sales manager was being eliminated. Fortunately, they offered me 48 weeks of severance, which I took gladly. And despite knowing what was going to happen next, we decided to write a really significant check to one of our Christian ministries that we followed as a way of just saying, we trust you, Jesus. And amazingly enough, 2 weeks later, I was offered a job, and we were able to use the rest of that severance money for seed money for our kids' college.
Fast forward a few more years, and I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was a tough time with 5 surgeries and a 1.5 years of chemotherapy. The exact day of my last treatment, I wrote in my journal that I knew brighter days were ahead. Life was going to get more normal. Minutes later, Mark called and dropped this news on me. I just lost my job, he said. We were both stunned and disheartened. It seemed like really, really bad timing.
I realized this morning in the first service that this was starting to sound like a guy who can't hold a job, but 8 years into co-founding a startup business, which I really loved. It was a special time. People that I worked with were awesome. But I was called into the office, the dreaded office, and was told that my job was being eliminated. And so I thought, well, this is okay, because it's going to go quickly just like the last time went. Not so quick. 2.5 years in, I was still writing tons of resumes, going on countless interviews, feeling like God had completely forgotten about me. But then during that tough time, we hung on to that early mentoring that we heard, and I made sure that every morning when I got up, I spent time in the Word, journaling, writing prayers, thoughts to God. Those were significant times, and we also continued to give to our church and to other ministries, even though things were tight. So those two disciplines really became an anchor in my life, and I really appreciated it, even though it was during a tough time.
The cancer thing, it wasn't a big financial hit because we had good insurance, but there's nothing like a scary diagnosis to rock your world. God was so present during those long months, providing support and comfort and even many laughs along the way. We discovered just how many kind, caring people we knew when they started bringing us meals and helping us in so many ways. One couple took us to plays and musicals and out for extravagant meals that we couldn't have afforded throughout the journey because they knew we needed some special cheer along the way.
So 5 years ago, I retired, not really certain what the next phase was going to be. But a verse that God had always been sharing with me was Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "I know the plans I have for you, plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." And it was during that time I was doing a little bit of consulting with a friend, and I came across this really great opportunity to do a 2-year certification program with a world-renowned author and organizational health expert, Pat Lencioni. And I decided to start my own consulting firm, and I named it Plans for Good 2911. I figured that if God had plans for good for us, that as leaders should have plans for good for themselves, for their teams, and for their organizations. So what I never thought was possible or even imagined, I have the opportunity to partner with Jesus to help leaders grow and thrive. Ephesians 3:20 says, "Now all glory to God who is able, through his mighty power at work within us, to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think." I used to think that verse was for the future, but as I look back over the stories in our lives, I began to realize that God has definitely done amazingly or infinitely more than I ever thought possible or even thought to ask during all the twists and turns.
The thing is that when you give, in good times and bad, amazing things happen. It causes you to prioritize God over stuff. It teaches you to be okay with making sacrifices to be able to continue to give. And you learn joy in giving. And even if all your dreams don't come true, you learn that God is faithful and he'll see you through even the most challenging of times. And he'll drop God-sized blessings in your lap along the way. We are grateful for getting sound advice about finances as new believers, and we're really grateful for the faithfulness of our God throughout this journey. Thanks.
I don't know. I know all of us have a story of faith. All of us have unique stories of faith, and I appreciate Mark and Diane. Can we give it up for them one more time? It takes a lot of courage to just walk that out and share with maybe some strangers, but also your church family. Here's what we've seen God do, and I'm so grateful for them, their friendship and partnership. Mark serves here at Heartland as one of our leaders. He didn't say this, but he leads one of our communities. It's the Leadership Refresh community. He also serves around here in many ways. I'm so grateful for them. As I heard their story, it sounded to me like faith is a roller coaster. One in which there's high points and low points, and sometimes you don't know what's around the bend, and just when you think you've made it through the scary part, you find that there's another scary thing coming. You know what I mean? A couple years ago, I had this experience where I coerced one of my kids to try a roller coaster. We were in the Magic Kingdom, the most magical place in Florida, Magic Kingdom, which is really just like a dad's worst nightmare is what that is. Any dads been to the Magic Kingdom and thought everybody else was in the most magical place on earth and you were like just kind of burying it and grinning and you were like, where's the golf course? Yeah, that was me a couple of years ago. And I had these little kids. My kids are still little, but they're like even more little, toddlers even. And I was sick and tired of going on the lame little kid rides. I love roller coasters. I grew up kind of thinking roller coasters were fun. I'd stay on the biggest roller coasters I could until they kicked me out of the parks late at night. And I wanted to have this experience with my own kids where we could enjoy roller coasters together. The thrill, the excitement, it's the most safe, contained, thrilling way to experience that. And so after a whole entire day of lame rides, really just, I can't do Dumbo any longer, you know what I mean? I looked at one of my kids, they were 5, and I said, all right, are you done with all the little kid stuff? Let's do a real roller coaster. And they said, no way, Dad. I'm good. I thought, man, I'm not paying this much money to go on Dumbo so many times. I'm getting a roller coaster. And so I went at it at a different angle. I said, well, child, what about this roller coaster over here? This roller coaster is the Goofy roller coaster. It's not a big roller coaster. In fact, it's very medium sized. This is what we would call a gateway drug in the business. It's designed to help you get a thrill and then realize there are bigger thrills out there. And then if you like this one, you could go even bigger. Would you like to do this? I don't want you to go on Space Mountain, but this Goofy roller coaster, which is really, look at that kid. That kid's 3. That's what I started doing. I started pointing out, shaming my kid. That little girl did it. You could do it. And they said, no, I don't want to do the roller coaster. And I reached deep into my fatherly arsenal of manipulation. I pulled out the nuclear option. I said to my child, hey, you don't have to worry. I will go with you. I'll sit right next to you. We will do this together. And wouldn't you know, all of my fatherly instincts were right. That was all it took for my kid to go, okay, if you'll go with me, I'll do it. And I thought, I'm a genius. It worked. And so we stand in line, and my kid's starting to get excited, starting to see the roller coaster at play, hearing the screams, seeing the faces of delight. He's really excited. And he starts looking at me going, Dad, I'm really glad we're doing this. I actually think this is going to be fun. This is the biggest roller coaster in the world. It wasn't. But he's all pumped up about it. We finally get onto the roller coaster. I'm thinking this is going to be this is a turning point in my kid's life. This is when a boy becomes a man. You know what I mean? This is it right here. And we literally take the first skid out of the little hangar area where we're just kind of tucked into this 2-person goofy roller coaster. And I put my hands in the air because that's the type of roller coaster rider that I am. And my son follows suit and he starts screaming out loud. And as a dad, I hear these screams to mean one very simple thing. This is the best day of my life, is what I think they are. And so I pull out my phone because I'm going to record this special moment of my kid's first roller coaster. And I put the selfie mode on and I'm holding, I think you get kicked off the rides these days if you do this, so don't do this. But I put the selfie mode on and I looked at us in the camera of my phone and I realized my son's eyes were super wide and his face, I didn't even think you could not blink on a roller coaster. But he wasn't screaming screams of delight. He was so scared. And he starts screaming, make it stop! Make it stop! I want to get off! This is not fun! And I realized I blew it as a dad. I straight up blew it. And I was thinking, at least he likes his mom. At least he's got one of the parents that he'll go to. So yeah, I lost all trust right here. I put my arm around him. I'm trying to comfort him. I'm trying to prove the I'm with you thing. And we pull back into the little entrance, little hangar area. I don't know what it's called. I call it the hangar. But we pull it in, and the bar lap pops up, and I've never seen anybody put distance between them and a ride so quickly. He jumped off, and he ran off the platform. He ran through the gift shop. He ran into the streets of Disney, and I had to chase him. Coincidentally, I was the last person he wanted to see. And I said, hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't feel like you enjoyed that experience as much as I thought you would. Is that fair? He goes, I hated it. I was like, okay, tell me what you really think. I said, well, man, you did it. I'm so proud of you. He goes, no, I'm never doing that ever again. And I was like, well, what was so bad? I mean, you got through it. Wasn't that a little bit fun? He goes, no, it wasn't any fun at all. I said, well, man, what were you so afraid of? Because that's like, if I'm being honest with you, that's not really that big of a roller coaster. Wrong thing to say. It's like, that's not really that big. There's bigger ones. There's better ones. Maybe we should try a bigger one. He goes, no. I said, well, why were you so afraid? He goes, Dad, you said you would be with me, but when I asked it to stop, you did nothing about it. And I realized that when I made a promise to my 5-year-old that I would be with him, a promise that technically I kept, by the way, it wasn't what he wanted from me. He didn't want just my presence, he wanted my power. And in every step of his life up until 5 years old, he had experienced every situation where I was in control of something, where I, as his dad, had some sort of authority or some power over what he was experiencing. And for the first time in his life, he recognized that he was in a situation that I was actually powerless to control, and it scared him even more. Friends, I think you and I know this sort of toddler, adolescent journey, sort of like growing up, maturing moment, not just when it comes to roller coasters, but when it comes to the roller coasters of faith, the roller coasters of life. When you and I are called to take a step to do a scary thing, maybe it's even an appropriate intermediate step that God is calling us to do. It feels to us like we're going to get on a ride. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know if we're going to like it. We don't even know if we want to be on the ride. And there's this like promise from God that he'll be with us, but we don't know if he's going to be powerful in the midst of it. This is a season of our church where we've called forth one faith action. Last week, if you were here, thank you for coming back, by the way. So glad that you came back. But last week, we kicked off a campaign. It's called the We Will campaign. And it's all about us taking steps of faith in God that will grow our faith and grow our awareness of him. And I know as we laid out a campaign that has a financial element to it for your family, whatever that is, whatever God is calling you, there's a call, a step, a line that God is asking you. Will you jump on this with me? Will you take this step? Will you trust me to bring you through this adventure to a good result? There might have been a little bit of fear in us and a wondering, God, can I really trust you? I've done that once, and I don't know if I want to do that again. And today, I want to ask the question, how do we get courage to take steps of faith when all we feel is fear? How do we take courage to take steps of faith when all we feel is fear? The overriding call of this series is from Joshua chapter 24. An old man named Joshua looked at all of God's people after they had gone through a tremendous amount of challenges, and they were on the cusp of embracing God's promise. And he said to them all, he said, reject those gods who would be lesser, who haven't done anything for you, and instead serve the Lord. He says, I don't know which way you're going to go, but here's the call. As for me and my family, say it all with me, we will serve the Lord. Meaning in every aspect of our life, we will continually, on a daily basis, put God first and trust that he is good. Joshua makes this promise, this commitment. This is a really huge commitment. I want to show this to you. In the 24th chapter of the book that bears his name. The 24th chapter of his story. I'm so grateful for the Chris Slips, but I kind of gave you the opportunity to hear their story written from maybe the 24th chapter of their story. Joshua had seen some things in his life, had trusted God for some things. And I want to know, how is it that at the end of his days, when he looks at what God has done, he makes this bold declaration that says, the best way for me to live life is to make a decision to serve the Lord. This has in it some sort of like commitment, sure, some sort of like duty, of course, but there is a delight that Joshua has coming off the page in this commitment. He says, it's going to be my joy for us to follow God and to see him always take care of us. As a young guy, I want to know, how do I get there in my life? Over the seasons that are ahead, through the twists and the turns that God is going to bring me through, to be able to, with Joshua, say, as for me and my family, we will still serve the Lord. How do I have a faith for a long haul, the courage to keep going when times are tough? And I want to tell you this. Joshua didn't get there overnight. In fact, Joshua's story begins, I'm going to take you all the way back to chapter 1 of Joshua. Joshua 1, it starts where the people on the other side of the promise that God is about to give them. It just takes a couple steps of faith for them to inherit it. All that had come before them had passed away, and now it was Joshua's turn to lead the people. And God made a promise to Joshua. Joshua said, we will serve the Lord. But he only does so because what God says to him. God looks at Joshua and says, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses who came before you. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. What a promise that is. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Friends, Joshua was able at the end of his life to look at all the people of God and say, though I've been through the roller coaster of faith, and though I've been through the gauntlet, and though we've been through it together, we will serve the Lord. And his we will started all the way back in chapter 1, not based on a declaration of what he intended to do for God, but a declaration of what God intended to do for him. Do you see it? Come on, don't leave me up here, church. I will quit. I won't quit. I'm going to preach harder is what I'm going to do. God says, I will. Every step of faith that God ever calls you into saying, hey, will you do this? God already says, hey, I'm going to do this before you do. Look at what God promises. There's 3 things. I will give you every place where you set your foot. No one will be able to stand against you. That's like a promise of protection. Like there's going to be no one who can actually overcome you. And then I will be with you. This is not a dad at Disney who's bored out of his mind trying to cajole a kid into some thrill. This is the promise of the almighty, powerful, ever-loving creator God who wants something good for his people. He says, I will be with you. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. You need to know that I am with you always. 3 promises. But how many people know this in life, that whenever God makes a promise to someone in the scriptures, he always invites their participation before they receive the blessings? Whenever God makes a promise to someone in the scriptures, he always invites their participation before he gives them the blessings. God never blesses you against your will. Do you know this? God will never force his blessings upon you. He is an invitational, open-handed God who makes ways for us to enjoy his good life, but he invites our step. Look at this. Don't change the slide yet. I will give you, then notice this, every place where you set your foot. The promise that God had made to the people of God was a land, a place for them to inherit and to dwell. That God was going to give this to them. There's actually a promise that preceded Joshua by some 500 years because God made this promise to Abraham, and then God re-upped this promise to Moses. And then when Moses died, God re-upped his promise to Joshua. Those circumstances may change and leaders may change. God's promises never change. And he looked at Joshua and said, wherever you walk, I will give you that part. Which is to say, you can switch to the next slide. Here's the call for what Joshua needs to do. God says, I will give, but you need to take a step. You need to actually walk into the place where I am giving you. God says, no one will be able to come up against you because I will protect you. But what you need to do then is to stand your ground. You actually need to be willing to do what I say to do and to take the steps that I tell you to take. Next week, Brad is going to show us what this call to Joshua really meant for him, what it required of him. And then this final promise from God, not just to give us the land and to protect us from our enemies, but he says, better than all the things, better than all the security, I give you myself. I will be with you. You only need just to be close by. To stay close by me, to stay committed to who I am, to stay near. I love these promises, these 3 promises from God, that he will give, he will protect, and he will be with us. These are eternal promises that he gives to his people. He gives these promises to you and to me. And you know what's amazing about these promises given to Joshua so many years ago? God has proven to be really good at keeping these 3 promises. Actually, I would say God is an excellent stay with you type of promise keeper, wouldn't you? That God is really good at being with his people. If you don't believe me, we just remember the days of Christmas when we celebrate a little baby who is born to the world. We celebrate what Matthew says is the birth of God into the world that gave Jesus the name Emmanuel. And Matthew calls out in his gospel that name means God with us. The coming of Jesus into this world is the fulfillment of this promise that God would give us a son, that he would fight our battles on our behalf, and he would be the embodiment of God's presence among us. So much so that after Jesus does the thing that he came to do in the same book of Matthew, and it closes. It started with, I will be with you. It closes with this promise from Jesus who says, surely I am with you forever until the end of the age. God is really good at being with his people. The next words that God gives to Joshua in this text is the words that since I'm with you, since I'm going to give you, since I'm going to protect you, since I am with you. Verse 7 says this, therefore you be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. God's presence is an encouraging power in our lives. Friends, we don't have a God who is powerful but absent. We don't have a God who is in authority but unaware. And likewise, we don't have a God who is present but powerless, kind of like my kid's dad was when they were on the roller coaster. Present but couldn't do anything about the ride. No. Heartland, here's the amen moment of the morning just to tee you up because I don't want you to miss it. I'd feel really bad for you if you missed the moment. I would just hate that. We don't have a God who is powerful but absent. We don't have a God who is powerless but present. We have it all. We have a God who has all power, and he's right here with you today. Amen. This is how God instills courage into Joshua. He says, I'm with you. Courage comes to us by being close to power. Have you ever been in a situation in which you didn't have credentials to be in the place that you were, but because you were with somebody who was, nobody stopped you or asked you, what are you doing here, or why are you here? It's a very courage-inducing moment. My son, not to make this all about my son, but the best example of this that I have is this year he got to meet a couple of MLB players. I won't tell you which team he met, but let me just say they were historic in their teamness. And one of the players looked at him and said, his name's Miles, said, hey, Miles, he goes, will you help me find my bat? And Miles was like, yeah. And he was looking around his batting practice. There's literally bats everywhere. He didn't know that each player has a couple bats. And this player took my son and put his hand on his shoulder, and he walked them into the clubhouse, through the dugout, into the clubhouse. And he walked around, and he came out with homemade chocolate chip cookies. I don't know. Did you know that's what's in a clubhouse? You always want to know. He came out with homemade chocolate chip cookies. That's Kansas City hospitality right there. The opposing dugout has chocolate chip cookies. And he looks around, he goes, he showed me everyone. I met everybody. Now, my son doesn't belong there. He has no business. He's a 9-year-old kid. But because of the person you're with, you have access to the places you might not be able to go. You don't have to be afraid if it's okay for you to be there. You've got power based on your proximity to the person that you're with. God being with you gives you all the power for this life that you need. 2 Peter chapter 1 says that God has granted us all that we need for life in godliness through our Lord Jesus Christ. Because God is a with us kind of God, you have everything that you need. There's a poet many, many decades ago, a man named Carl Wilson Baker. And he coined this phrase that I want to show you in a poem on courage. It's a very short 10-line poem. The last line ends this way. It says, courage is fear that has said its prayers. Ways that we get close to power with God is to spend time with God in prayer, to be near God. I find in the moments of my life where the floor drops out from underneath me and I can't no longer see any around the corner, I can't dream about the future, all I need to do is to spend time with God in prayer, and he will meet with me. He will remind me that I've never left you. I've never forsaken you. Friends, if you need courage today, it is not far away because God has made a promise to us. You're closer to power than you might otherwise think. You might be asking yourself the obvious question I hope you're asking of, Dan, what does this have to do with money? What does this have to do with our finances? What does this have to do with me making a decision in my family about serving God and giving back to him? This doesn't seem to have anything to do with it. Well, I want to show you that one of the steps of faith that we always need to have in the back of our mind whenever we're called forward is to know that God is with us. It gives us courage. But in the New Testament, we see that God being with us gives us more than just courage. It actually gives us something that we need to fight the materialism that exists in our own heart. Actually, it's this reason that the author of Hebrews pulls upon Joshua chapter 1, verse 5, the promise that God made to Joshua, that I will never leave you nor forsake you. I'm always with you. You can have courage close to power because I'm with you. When the author of Hebrews writes this is verse 5 of chapter 13. It tells the whole followers of Jesus, keep your lives, say this with me, everybody, free from the love of money. Oh, does that feel like a right turn to you? Be content with what you have because God has said, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. The presence of God is our courage to keep going, but the presence of God, I want you to miss this because it's so powerful. The presence of God in our lives is our contentment to fight greed in our hearts. When we know God is with us, it allows us to be content in a way that only God can make us. Contentment, it comes from the word to be contained, to be contained, to be held by. If you have a glass of water, the water is contained by the cup. It's content then means to have your life contained and held up by God. To be content in him is to say, all that I have is yours. It's literally the words of that song that we ended on today. Seeking you as a precious jewel. Lord, to give up, I'd be a fool. You are my contentment. You are my all in all. All in all. The author of Hebrews puts this in juxtaposition to money because a lot of us try to be content with our money, to be contained in our life with such a small master, to see things as the purpose. And in opposition to that, we pull on this promise that God made to Joshua, saying as you take a step of faith, God is not just giving you courage, he's giving you contentment because of this. Because God makes promises to his people about his provisions. God makes promises to his people about his protections. But better than provisions and protection is God's presence. Because when you seek first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, then all these things are added unto you. We flip it around. We put power in money, and we put our lives in money. And money becomes our contentment. And then money becomes our sorrow when it can't hold our lives. And friends, there is a better way. It's the way that recognizes that God is working in my life to give me not more of his stuff, but more of himself. That's what the We Will campaign is all about. Is us as a church getting more of God in our lives, more of God in our church, more of God in our families, more of God so that we have the courage to take the steps of faith that he's calling us to take. And so that we have the contentment in him to push back against all the enemies of our soul that would try and rob us of our joy. And when we're close to God, there is nothing in this world that can stand against us. No amount of money promised to you, no amount of fear of your debt, no amount of whatever it is that's standing in your way would ever rob you of your joy. You could be like our friends Mark and Diane, who went through highs and lows and at certain seasons had seasons of plenty and certain seasons had seasons of lack. And yet the whole time they show us what it is to be contained, to be held by God. And that's what today is all about. Today is a day for us to make a commitment to God. To say, God, I want to take a step of faith, but to me, honestly, God, if I'm thinking about this, I feel like you've invited me to go on a roller coaster ride that I don't really want to go on. And I'm afraid of it. And so, God, talking to you, my courage comes from meeting with you in prayer, taking my fear up to you and letting you have it. Today, I want to facilitate a conversation between you and God based around 3 questions. And this is going to happen in just about 2 minutes. I'm going to give you moments to just have this conversation. Here's the 3 questions. I'd love for you to talk to God and tell him how he's been with us so far. In your life, how has God demonstrated that he's kept this promise? Second, I want you to talk to God and let him know the condition of your heart, the desire that you have for one of his promises. Do you want his provisions? Do you need his protection? Do you need his presence? Which one is resonating with you that you would ask him to give you more of? And then finally, what is the we will step that you're willing to take today? Is it to take the step over the line of giving? To say, for the first time in my life, God, I'm going to give to you knowing that you're worth it because you've first given to me. Or is it the step that you're going to not just give God the leftovers, but you're going to intentionally give to God through a plan? Saying, God, I want to give to you because you've given so much to me faithfully, and so I'm going to set up a plan. Or are you going to give to God because he's blessed you more and more, and yet your giving hasn't reflected it? And maybe now you're in a season, the step of faith for you is to actually increase what God has given you. To give back to him is your step of faith. To take a step onto a new roller coaster, so to speak. One that God promises to provide for you, protect you, but also to be present with you. Now, if you're here today and no one else in this room has any interest in your finances, you get to just talk to God and let him take an interest in your finances. But if you're here today and maybe you're married, maybe you're a parent here with one of your kids, maybe a high school kid, college kid, and they maybe don't contribute to your finances the way that you wish they would like, but they're interested in your finances. Interested in the step of faith that their finances represent. As a married couple or as a parent-child sort of relationship, I'd love for you to actually make this room buzz with conversation as you answer these 3 questions, not just to God, but you have a conversation with each other to answer these together. I see around this room husbands and wives asking, how has God been with us so far? And remembering back to the faithfulness of God. Of sharing with each other what of the promises of God, his provision, his protection, and his presence they desire the most. And a same pageness about saying, hey, here's what I feel God's calling us to do as our we will moment. What are you feeling God is calling us to do as a step of faith in our we will moment? And your time for this conversation starts in just a second. Because I'm going to say go, and you're going to turn to each other and you're going to talk. Those watching online, we'd love for you to hear Lisa's story. She's going to connect with you in just a moment. But for those in the room, we would love for you to turn and talk. And then in 3 minutes and 35 seconds, I will be back up to stop your conversations and lead us in a prayer. Go. Take about another 30 seconds. You guys, this is such a sweet moment in our church. I love that I have this perspective that I have of just being able to, I can't hear you. I don't know what you're saying. I love though, the fact that families are gathering together around God's faithfulness to them. God is really good at being with his people. And his withness, his faithfulness, his presence, it gives us courage. It gives us contentment. And the way that you're going to be able to follow up on your commitment of what you say God is calling you to take that step of faith is to give. It's to give. Last week, as we kicked this off, there was so many people, I'm so grateful for them, who are ready to give, who were ready to give last week, who said, I've been feeling this, but I just needed to know like what to do. How do we do more? What do we do more? And they said, can you help us know how to do that? So there are boxes in the back if you want to write a check. That's something that is very meaningful to a lot of people to actually write out the amount and to pray their way through the process of that. I'm not as spiritual, and I'm a millennial, so I save my checks for when I really need them. But I give online at heartlandchurch.org/give. And that's where you can give a one-time gift, if that's your step, is to take a step into giving. But you can also set up a recurring gift. That's what Chris and I, has been our pattern for our marriage, has been to give the same day that we receive our paychecks as a way of saying, God, you deserve the first, you deserve the best. And someone did this week, and they said, Dan, it's kind of confusing online because there's a lot of these accounts. There's an account that says general. There's an account that says compassion. There's an account that says food pantry. And there's a couple other things too, like, do we give to all of them? And I said, yes, you give to all of them. And they said, really? I said, no, not really. You give to what God has put before you to give cheerfully. The general fund is the fund for us to do good together as a church. It's where the majority of our ministries find all of their funding, as well as make a difference in our community. The compassion fund is specific monies that go directly to families in our community, primarily through Heartlanders, but also for those who God has brought along our path to bless them in moments of hardship. And then our food pantry account is a way for us on a weekly basis. We have a food pantry open on Sundays to bless the community. So as God has laid it on your heart, you can choose one of those. If you're taking your first step into giving, I encourage you just to start with a general fund, just to be a part of what God's doing here in the we will type of way. Hey, Heartland, I did this with the first service. It was so encouraging. But I would love to ask you to respond with we will if you believe that God has called you to take a step of faith in following him, that as for you and your family, will you serve God by giving? Amen. Would you stand? We're going to sing, and we'll be dismissed.